Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Denisha Rajendran, and I'm moderating the fifth YouTube session of the eighth fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 11 award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. We'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has lots and lots of exclusive author goodies a little later in this session. And you can find out about the Pixel Project by visiting www.thepixelproject.net. Today we have a very special guest with us for our live Read for Pixels discussion. We have with us SL Huang, the fabulous fantasy and action thriller author. SL Huang. SL is a Hugo Award-winning and Amazon best-selling author who justifies an MIT degree, that's right, you guys, MIT, by using it to write eccentric mathematical superhero fiction. The author of the CAS Russell novels from Tor Books, as well as the new fantasy Burning Roses, Huang is also a short fiction writer with stories in analog, FNSF, Nature, and numerous best of anthologies. When not writing, Huang is a Hollywood stunt performer and firearm expert. SL has also generously donated a couple of awesome goodies to the stash of author goodies we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page, including goodie number 1. SL Huang writes you a math or science limerick. SL will write a limerick on a math or science topic of the donor's choice, whether it's about pi or mRNA, which I'm sure everybody knows, or black holes. Name one, and SL will get cracking on this writing challenge just for you, no matter how obscure the topic is. They will email a copy of the limerick to the donor with a hand-lettered version to follow. This treat is fully transferable or giftable, so you may request that they write the limerick as a birthday gift to a friend. The second goodie is workshops, SL Huang workshops your query letter. So if you're a novice science fiction and fantasy author looking for professional critique of your query letter because you are hitting a wall of rejections from agents and publishers, SL is offering a chance for one Read for Pixel donor to have their query letter workshopped by them in writing via email. This opportunity includes 2 rounds of critique, the initial submission and the revised submission, and 1 follow-up email of up to 3 questions after each round. These goodies are available to donors worldwide. However, if you want them, you'll have to make your donations fast because there is only 1 of each goodie and it's first come, first serve. So once these goodies are gone, they are gone. We've raised $1,650 towards our $5,000 goal so far, which is our slowest fundraiser yet. So please give generously before the fundraiser ends in October 2021. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. If you're watching this session on YouTube right now, you will be able to ask SL questions live. Just make sure you're logged into your YouTube account so that you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of the YouTube screen. And Regina, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to be read out to SL. So now over to SL. Welcome to Read for Pixels.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
What will you be reading for us today?
I'm going to be reading from my fantasy Burning Roses. Burning Roses, there we go. Burning Roses is a Chinese and queer inspired fantasy. It's about Little Red Riding Hood as a middle-aged woman if Little Red Riding Hood were a recovering assassin, because that's the kind of thing I write. And she teams up with Ho Yi, the archer from Chinese mythology, who is a trans woman in my version. And they have adventures together, and they angst about their past and their families. And I'm going to be reading from the middle of the book, so I'll just give you a little bit of a background on the passage I'm going to be reading. So this is about Rosa. It's from her perspective. She's Little Red Riding Hood in this version, except much older now. And it's a flashback to when she first met her wife many years ago. And her wife is Beauty from Beauty and the Beast, except Chinese in my version, or fantasy Chinese. And at this point, she and Beauty, who May in this version, they're both in quite toxic relationships. Rosa's in a toxic friendship with Goldilocks from Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And of course, Beauty and the Beast is quite a toxic and emotionally abusive relationship. So that's the background to this scene.
Yeah. So just to let our audience know, just before SL begins reading, we'd like to issue a trigger warning for some themes of emotional abuse. So, yeah. SL, you may continue.
All right. So I will dive right in. So this is, I'm not going to be able to use that on the screen, but this is from Burning Roses. The first time Rosa saw May was in a garden. Rosa had come here to hunt. She'd perched in a blind where she could see over the wall into this castle where rumor held that a fearsome beast dwelled, a one-time prince who had been cursed from humanity long ago, holding a princess captive to his depraved needs. And instead of the beast, she had seen May. May had been so young, barely more than a girl, and not a princess at all, Rosa found out later, only an unlucky child who had been sold to someone still too royal for the laws to apply to him. She wore her hair loose, and it fell in thick black waves past her waist. Her skin was so pale that the contrast was striking, black and white, coal and ivory. Rosa's sight dipped, and she stopped breathing. May was making a slow circuit of the garden. She reached out and touched one of the roses, a late red bloom, almost as if she was sorry for it. The beast came out. Rosa had expected a lumbering, ugly thing, clumsy and misshapen. Instead, he was graceful. He moved like a giant cat, his bulk becoming light in his bound across the garden, and he wore the magnificent ermine-trimmed cape of the prince he had been. He whirled through the roses and approached May. Such an overwhelming hate engulfed Rosa that she almost choked on it. She'd never in her life felt such a thing. Her hands went white-knuckled on the rifle. But then May had reached out to the beast and touched him gently, with affection. She twisted the red rose from the bush and held it out. The beast took it and cradled it to his breast, and he bowed his head to her. Rosa's hands trembled and hesitated. For the first time, she did not know what to do. And so, after she'd watched the beast leave the next day to prowl or hunt or whatever he left his remote castle to do, Rosa found herself climbing down from the blind and over the wall and into the garden. Her step on the gravel made barely a sound, but the roses were so quiet that May turned immediately. Rosa had never felt so rough or ungainly. Goldie had started calling her my big brute of late. Affectionately, Rosa insisted it was affectionate, and it was true, wasn't it? But now she felt every inch of the description in a way she wished she didn't. May started when she saw another person inside the walls with her. She stared at Rosa. Her breath quickened. "Hello," Rosa said absurdly. "I saw you over the... I'm not going to hurt you." May's eyes had flicked to the rifle. "I don't think you will," May said, as if this was surprising to her. "Who are you?" I'm nobody. My name is Rosa." Why was she suddenly stumbling over her tongue? But May smiled, and it was like warmth coming after a long winter. "Rosa," she said. "They are your kinsmen, then." And she gestured to the flowers. Later, Rosa thought that was the moment she was gone. Even when May refused to leave with her, to let herself be rescued, even when she insisted the castle was her home, a home she had been sold to 7 years before. Even when she would not let Rosa kill the beast and set her free. It was the subject of their first real quarrel, after they'd been stealing kisses in the woods for months, after Goldie had begun to demand where Rosa kept herring off to, and May's increasing remoteness had begun to shorten the beast's temper even more than usual. I don't understand you, Rosa had snapped that midwinter day, when May had yet again stated that she could not leave, even for a few days, even to see the mountains or the city or people or some place that was not the walled garden and its iron-fisted master. I don't understand how you can let him do this to you. He's kept you his prisoner. How can you want to stay? I don't know, May said. She pinched her hands together the way she did when she was nervous or upset. The way she did when they came back late and she was afraid the beast might suspect she had snuck out. The way that usually made Rosa's hands itch for her rifle. He's not as strong as you think he is. If I leave him alone here, Rosa, he needs me. He says he'll die without me. Bull, Rosa said. And even if he would, so what? You don't owe him anything. It's just been the two of us here for so many years, May said. I care for him. It's hard. You never saw anybody else because he kept you here, Rosa shouted. She knew she was losing her temper, but it seemed appropriate. He's brainwashed you. He's manipulating you. Whatever good feelings you have for him, they aren't real. Of course they're real. May drew herself up, and her voice went colder in a way Rosa hadn't yet heard from her. And they're mine. I know what he's done. I'm not so naive as you seem to want me to be. Rosa drew back, stung. Reading books is not the same as, so what then? I should bow to the whims of the first person who drops into my garden? May said. Instead of honoring what I feel for myself, is that what you would require of me, Rosa? No, I'm trying to tell you what's best for... Rosa cut herself off. The two of them stared at each other. I'm not your child, May said into the silence, nor your pet, nor some flower to be tended, and perhaps you should look to the poison in your life before you judge mine. Rosa turned away and wrapped her red cloak around herself more tightly. You haven't met her. You have the wrong impression. Then why do you lie to her every time you come here? May asked. Why do you always make excuses for what she says to you? At least I know how ill I've been used, even if I can't wish away how close I've grown to him despite it. She drew back, resettling herself and staring up at the white winter sky. I can't tell you to turn away. She's your family. Family is difficult. I understand. She's my friend, Rosa said stoutly, too loudly. She's been there for me when no one else in the world, when I'm not going to turn my back on her. So she's not perfect. Nobody is. They stood in that unhappy place together, there in the snow. Then May turned to go back to the castle, but her step paused, her head bent so Rosa only half saw her face through a curtain of ebony hair. Give me time, she said, so softly Rosa almost didn't hear.
Wow. Okay. That was very good reading. I was just glued in.
Thank you very much.
So, yes, so let's just move on to our questions. The first question we have, your books feature plenty of fantastic female characters. For example, CAS Russell from the CAS Russell series is a mathematical prodigy. Yeah, zero-sum game, yeah. And uses her gift to take down men twice her size. A parallel can be drawn with your general life experience. You graduated from MIT with a math degree and you are a Hollywood stunts person. Who or what are your inspirations for your female characters?
Oh, that's a good question. I do get a lot of people who ask if CAS is based on me, and the answer I tend to give to that is that I really hope I kill a few less people than she does. I mean, she does murder a lot of people in these books. Let's be real. But I think what I'm really drawn to is writing messy women, because I know I'm very flawed. I try not to be, but I am. And many people in my life are as well. And, we're always striving to be our better selves. But, sometimes that comes with a lot of stumbling blocks. And I like exploring that space of people who are maybe not good people, but striving to be better.
Right.
And I really, I like CAS in particular is a little bit of wish fulfillment, I would say too, because, there are certainly times when I wish I were a little bit more angry or violent, or not violent. I don't wish I were more violent, but there's that sort of like, if somebody's rude to me or sexually harasses me or, does something really unconscionable towards me, and I just get so angry, or to one of my friends, and I get really, really angry about, some of the stuff that happens in the world. And, I am not like CAS. I cannot just go and like punch people in the face, right? And to be truthful, I don't want to be that person either. But there is that level of a little bit of power fantasy in there. Like, what if, we could deal with the world this way? And, in the books, it doesn't work very well for her, but it's fun. It can be fun to write.
I would call her very precise.
Oh, thank you.
Perfect, precise. So, from science fiction and fantasy to thrillers, all genres have their share of female stereotypes and tropes. How do you break stereotypes in to create a female character with agency while dealing with the world around her, including situations that involve sexism, misogyny, and violence against women and girls?
Well, one thing I do try to pay attention to a lot is the people around me in my life, and on that I talk to online, or and I try to listen to people's stories, and it can be very instructive, and I think it makes me a better human in the world as well, to listen to people's experiences and to think, and because everybody experiences things differently, and especially intersections with race or queerness, or where you live, or what culture you're from. I really try to kind of make sure I'm always listening to stuff like that. And people are generous enough to share their experiences online, even people I don't know, and trying to keep very open to learning more about the way other people navigate the world, and what happens, when they interact with maybe things that I would experience in a different way. So there's definitely that aspect of it, where I try to think of all the incredible women and femme people that I know and have known or have seen, and just try to make sure I am showing that same breadth. Even though these characters aren't based on anybody in particular, but like to show the same breadth of humanity that I encounter in the world.
Mm. In fact, actually, we have a comment from one of our, a question actually from one of our audience, from Misty. Who were your influences? Are any of them women and or same ethnicity as yourself? So I think you were talking about culture earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so.
Oh gosh, this is kind of a hard question to answer, I think, because now that I am, a professional author, and especially now that I'm, very aware of a lot of this stuff, I do definitely seek out, incredible female Chinese authors, or female Asian authors, or queer. I'm actually identify as genderqueer, queer and non-binary Asian authors, and there are just so many, and also male Asian authors, like everybody, people from my culture who are writing sort of from that same culture. And there's so many incredibly good ones, J.Y. Yang, Zhen Cho, Ken Liu, Ted Chiang. I could just keep on listing, forever. But it's what my formative influences, I think, were from when I was a child and I was reading all the science fiction and fantasy that was recommended to me in the library. And that always tended to be like the chosen one, the white farm boy who, gets the calling to the greater, fantasy world or whatever, or the greater science fictional world. And I very rarely saw myself in those stories, except that I really loved, the science fiction and fantasy aspect of it. And I wasn't really thinking about that very much as a child. But I would say that was very formative to me in reacting against it, and certainly there were amazing authors of color, writing at that time as well. But like I in my local library, that I didn't see the ways towards those books, or they weren't recommended to me, or I didn't know enough to seek them out, I guess. So I would say that I'm definitely, I'm trying to take these traditions that I identify as mine and make them my own a bit. And in Burning Roses is a really good example of that, where I taking these fairy tale traditions that I grew up on and making them something that like feels very personal to me.
Okay, moving on to our next question. Your female characters are flawed in some way. So, like we spoke about with Cass, she can be a little bit messy. Do you ever feel pressured by gender and cultural stereotypes to make your female characters likable or relatable?
All the time. Yes, definitely. That is definitely a thing that I find myself doing almost unconsciously, and then I have to push back against, because I'm like, no, I want to show people being human. There's an incredibly good essay by Rose Lemberg that I read ages and ages ago that really stuck with me. And it's about Rose was writing. R.B. Lemberg. Their name now. They were writing about not. They were kind of talking about the strong female character thing that people say, like you need strong female characters, and their argument was that we don't want strong female characters. We want this diversity of female characters who have all these different quirks and different personalities and depths to them, like the professor who mismatches her socks, like stuff like that, like all the way through. And then they listed a lot of examples of like different characters that men get to be and that women don't tend to get to be in fiction. And it was an incredibly good essay. I read it like, I don't know, I want to say almost 10 years ago probably. And it really stuck with me because it was just, and R.B. Lemberg is an incredibly good author themselves, like science fiction and fantasy author, and I recommend you look them up. But that idea of that, men get to be flawed, men get to have these interesting personalities. And I started to realize that a lot of times the characters that I am most drawn to are the characters who are incredibly, like have incredibly terrible aspects to them. And those are almost always, white men. And I feel like a lot of times when creators want to, there's this sort of obstacle where we want to create characters of color or, female characters, gender diverse characters, where we say like, oh my gosh, but I don't want to give a like bad stereotype of that. I don't want to make this character the bad guy, which is a very good instinct, I think. But there's sort of another degree to that, which is if we are never allowing anybody but white men to be extremely flawed, we take away this incredible breadth of characterization and some of the best characters in canon that people get really drawn to, despite all of their problems. And I think that's a real issue. I really do. So I do try to combat it in my work, but it's hard because I also don't want to reinforce stereotypes, right? Like I don't want to have the extremely violent lesbian character that has been seen a lot, and I don't want to fall into that either. So it is a line to walk, and I'm not sure I always walk it correctly either, but I really try, and I put a lot of thought into it.
Yeah. So just following from that, do you ever get any flack for not making female characters likable enough?
I don't read my reviews, so I don't know. I'm sure people are saying I'm sure there are people who object to that, and I just am blissfully ignorant. I would say from from editors and stuff. My editors have generally been like completely in support of me, agents and editors, and my critique partners, because they understand what I'm doing with it. And they will tell me also if they think I've gone too far in a certain direction. They're like, okay, dial it back a little or something. And sometimes I listen to that, and sometimes I don't. But in general, they get what I'm trying to do, and that this is a very intentional thing.
Okay. Many authors, especially male authors, still stumble when it comes to passing the Bechdel test, whereby female characters have conversations about topics other than men. Why do you think many genre authors still have trouble writing stories that pass the Bechdel test, despite the fact that there are many more things that women talk about other than men?
I think it's they don't have enough women in the cast. I think that is the biggest problem, because if you have your cast and you're like, okay, you have like 8 main men and like 3 women, and you're like, oh, that's pretty good. I have 3 major female characters or whatever. But it's very easy for those women to never interact or to only be around the men. I think it's very hard to fail the Bechdel test when you have a cast that's half women, and my casts, I try to make them half or more than half women, and I try to have a lot of non-binary characters as well, because that's important to me. But I kind of, it really bothers me that people think this is difficult, because when you have half your cast, the cast is what's moving and shaking the plot, right? In order to pass the Bechdel test, the women in the cast have to be doing plot relevant things and talking about plot relevant things, and there'd have to be enough of them for them to run into each other while doing these plot relevant things, and that's really all there is to it. So I think if more men just made sure that at least half or more of their cast was female, they wouldn't have any problem passing the Bechdel test. I don't think it's that hard.
Right. So then what would you suggest for male writers who want to write female conversation, relationships, and friendships realistically?
I think, one thing is to make sure you have women in your life who you're actually like listening to, so make sure you're reading female authors, you're watching like women giving TED Talks, you're watching female scientists give talks, like stuff like that. Make sure you're not curating your environment to be, lacking women. And realize that we're people. We do have different experiences from being socialized, like women, femme people, people who have been raised as women or socialized as women in any way. We do tend to have some different experiences, but we are also just people. And I think, there's sort of this idea out there, I think, that it's easier to write like that it's easier to write like aliens or animals as characters or something, or other species, invented species, and easier to write those than it is to write human women, which I think is very bizarre. So make us just people, and diverse people, that not the Smurfette, the one chick who her only defining characteristic is that she's female, make us, the smart one and the quirky one and the one who's too angry all the time, and all these other tropes that men tend to get. Give them to women too.
Yeah, that's a very good advice, I would say. We have a question from our audience, BJ Kev. Her question is, SL, your Hugo Award-winning book was deeply moving. Where did your idea come from?
Thank you very much. The Hugo winning story is called As the Last Time I Know. It's on Tor.com for free if anybody would like to read it. And it is the basic premise of it is it's about nuclear weapons and nuclear proliferation, but in a secondary world. It's not our world, but it's sort of a parallel allegorical story about weapons of mass destruction. And I wrote it after I was living in Japan at the time, and I had gone to both the atomic bomb museums in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And those experiences, they were very formative for me and very difficult. They were difficult museums to go to, but also it made me feel like they gave me such a perspective on that period of history that I'm very, very grateful for. And I hadn't really understood, I don't think, we learn about atomic bombs in school. Yeah. I hadn't understood how enormous they are. I mean, how apocalyptic this is. We do this in science fiction. We have like Death Stars and stuff, and we use nuclear weapons as like fun apocalypse makers in science fiction and stuff. But they really are. They are so huge. Like the scale of it. It was very, very hard to see all that. And then the following year, I went to the Nanjing Massacre Museum in Nanjing, China. And that was also a very hard museum to see, of course. The Nanjing Massacre, 300,000 people died. And there was a lot of an extreme amount of sexual violence against women as well, and violence against children, and perpetrated by the Japanese army. And it was so, it was very difficult, but also it just made me think a lot to see those three museums so close together and back to back. And thinking about my family who was in China at the time, and thinking about the motivations for Truman, because I don't think he was thinking about Chinese women when he dropped those bombs. That wasn't his motivation in doing it either. And, I don't have any answers on these issues or the atrocities of war and war crimes. But I wrote the story to kind of explore those thoughts that were running in my head and to share them, with people who have not had the opportunities to see what I saw and maybe just ask those questions. So that's where that inspiration came from.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's really cool. So thank you, BJ, for that question. So moving back to the CAS Russell series, you explore, male-female relationships between the main characters, which are generally quite equitable, and some of your male characters are respectful of women, their thoughts and their decisions. So let's talk about writing male characters, because you write some compelling male characters who subvert masculine stereotypes. So who or what are your inspirations for your male characters?
That's a really good question. I've never thought about it from that perspective. And thank you for saying that I do it well. I think I would say I've always had a lot of men in my life because I've always had a lot of male friends and, family, of course, but also being a science and math person, being a martial arts person, being a firearms person. These are very male-dominated spaces, and I like there are some of my math classes even at MIT I was maybe the only woman or femme presenting person, or maybe one of two, like this is very not, it was very natural for me from a young age to be moving in male dominated spaces. And I never really minded, I guess. Although, much later in life, I started like dissecting what that kind of socialization had done. Right. But that means I've always had a lot of male friends who have been very accepting of me and very respectful of me and very, us all moving in the same orbit and feeling very equal. And there have been times when I've been bullied for, gender related thing, not being female enough or not being, whatever, people wanted to pick out. And my male friends have been very protective of me in saying that I'm one of them, an equal with them. I absolutely adore my friends. They're amazing people. So I think that has helped show me as well, like we're talking about the breadth of humanity with women. I also see the breadth of humanity with men, just because I have seen so many very good men in my life, and I've also seen some very bad men in my life. So it's definitely, again, that sort of breadth of humanity. And I also have a lot of non-binary people in my life as well, since we're talking about all genders. I have gender queer people in my life, gender fluid people in my life, agender people in my life, who all interact with their gender in different ways and are all like really incredible people and all very different people. So I think that definitely helps.
Okay. Do you think reframing how stories describe men and boys away from hostile and toxic stereotypes and towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways fantasy writers can break away from toxic tropes that promote toxic masculinity and dehumanization of women?
I definitely think that's one of the ways. Yeah. I don't think that's necessarily like the only way or required. But I love to see that in books, and there are some authors who do it very well. And it's great because it's realistic as well. It's reflecting reality. Like I said, I have many men in my life who are not engaging in those kinds of toxic masculinity, or if they start to like catch themselves, and are very aware that this is a thing to avoid. So I think that's always a really, really great thing. I also think that there are so many ways of doing this too, right? Like I love, for example, when fantasy writers depict worlds of societies that they want to see, right? Like societies that are very equal in gender, for example. But also, there are people who write incredible books that are like about patriarchal societies and about the characters navigating those. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think there are all different ways to do it, but I do absolutely love to see men who buck those stereotypes as characters.
Yeah. So as the number of female, trans, and non-binary and genderqueer protagonists in SFF books and stories continues to rise, do you think that the violent and domineering alpha male type character would eventually phase out of SFF, or do you think it's one of those stereotypes that will stick around for much longer than expected?
It's going to be around a long time. I feel quite sure of that. Especially because, Hollywood, I've worked in Hollywood a really long time, right? And
Right.
I love working in Hollywood. There are some great progressive people in Hollywood. But as a whole, creatively, it's also behind, even where publishing is, and where even like definitely behind where all the most progressive conversations are. And there's also, it self-perpetuates stuff like that, right? Like the male actors who get more opportunities, and then white male actors in particular, and then they have the resume to then get more opportunities, right? And this happens in writing as well. White male authors who get more opportunities, and then they get tapped for still other opportunities, and it feeds itself. I think we're going to be very, very slow in ever really moving away from that entirely. And maybe it'll happen eventually that it fades into just one of many characterizations, that would be my preference for sure. But I think it's going to be around a while, unfortunately.
Oh. So let's go back to stories. Stories are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about social change. So writing stories in genre, like for example, in your Cass Russell series, plenty of fight scenes and is filled with action-packed. It's written with plenty of fight scenes and action-packed scenes as well. So how do you find a balance between showing the violence as an integral part of the story and giving the reader a realistic depiction of violence without being gratuitous?
Oh, I love how you assume that this question assumes that I've done that well, which thank you for that. Because I do think that's a hard balance. I don't want to glorify violence in reality, right? Like that is not something I want to do. However, I also find action thriller scenes to be very entertaining in movies and books, and I think that's fine. I don't see a contradiction there. I want more, people who aren't men to be able to do these fun action scenes. But there is that very real question there of like, what's the motivation of this that I'm showing of this violence? So I do try to think it through. I try to show consequences for it. I try to show other characters objecting, or bringing up contrasts or calling out the, Cass, for example, who's one of
Right.
the most violent characters. Yeah, and like framing this as something that is, not okay to the extent that she does it. And even when self-defense situations come up and stuff, that there are often like a lot better ways that she could be going about her, how she deals with it. So I try to do stuff like that, but it is a very hard question, I think. And I think what I try really hard to do is to really like ask a bunch of hard questions in the fiction, like have the characters be asking hard questions and stuff. And it sounds like it works. So I hope it works.
It does.
Thank you.
The line between consent and coercion isn't always very clear in SFF genre, whether it's epic fantasy or space opera or superhero action thrillers. Certainly, in some subgenres of fantasy, violence against women, especially rape, is still used to catalyze a male character's development or as a shorthand for allowing how brutal the world is. So, do you think this is an issue that writers in the genre have started tackling successfully in recent years?
Certainly many authors,
Yeah.
and not only in recent years. I would say people have been trying to do this for quite a while now. There are certainly authors, I think, who I shall remain nameless, who I think are not trying to be conscious of these things. But there are definitely many authors I've read who I think are writing with great awareness. I'm sorry. What was the question other than authors doing it well?
Yeah, that's just whether they've been able to be tackling it in the recent years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there are some people who do it very effectively, especially people who have something to say about their experiences of the world, if that makes
Mm.
sense. Like if they're sort of writing from a place of, this is something that is personal to me. I feel like that very often comes through, and can be very powerful. I thought I would never write a scene of sexual violence. The Cass books, she's never threatened with that. I was like, I'm not interested in writing that, especially if it's like a power fantasy. And then my upcoming book, The Water Outlaws, which is a Chinese-inspired wuxia fantasy, secondary world fantasy, but with like it's about a group of bandits who are, basically rebelling against the government, and they're pretty much all women or queer people, and
Oh,
or queer
cool.
people. Yeah, it's sort of self-selecting because they form this group. They rebel against the government, like Robin Hoods who steal from the rich and keep it for themselves. Talking about messy people, right? So, but there is a very important scene of sexual violence in that is currently in the draft, that where I realized I had something to say about it, and I had something to say about my own experiences with the way, interacting with men who did not respect those boundaries, and not only that, but the consequences. I wanted to write even more than the scene. I wanted to write about the consequences of speaking up or fighting back, because I feel like that is such a difficult question when anything happens. Like,
Yeah.
do we say something? Do we report it? Do we, make a big deal, etc.? Do we press
Yeah.
charges? Do we get them in trouble? Are we the feeling like the problem person, even though of course we're not, right?
We're not. Yeah.
Yeah, but it is a question that I think is. I think anybody who's experienced this would know what I'm talking about when I talk about how hard that question can be, and I completely respect any person's decision to report or not to report, or to try to bring consequences or to not do that, because the unfortunate reality is a lot of times the consequences come down on the person who speaks up or who fights back. And that's
Exactly.
it. Yeah, that's such a huge problem, and I wanted to I wanted to explore that fictionally because it's personally important to me. So I hope it does not. I'm sure there are people who will not read the book because of that, because it's personally traumatic for them to read scenes like that. But I hope that there are it will not take away from the book as a whole, because I really was doing that in quite an intentional way, and I hope it works.
So, in fact, actually, just drawing from that a little bit
Mhm.
more, what would you suggest to SFF authors who wish to include violence against women in their books?
Ooh, I think it depends on why the author is doing it. Like, my advice would differ, right? Like, if the author is putting it in because it's something that they feel personally driven to write about, I think I may not even have any advice, especially depending on, which direction they're coming from with it. If it's somebody who's, like you said earlier, somebody who's using sexual violence to just show how
Victimized.
crappy the world is. Oh, I'm sorry, am I
Yeah.
allowed to curse? Just show how bad the world is. I would say that, I mean, yes, that is a thing that happens, but it's also, in addition to being very traumatic for some readers, it is also incredibly cliched. And it's cliched in a way that's very damaging. There's so many ways that could be explored that are more complex and
Hmm.
would make for a better book, in addition to, being something that a lot of readers don't want to engage in. There's another type of scene that I really quite object to, which I have seen, which is writing sexual violence in a way that seems like it's supposed to be titillating or erotic or like a sex
Yeah.
scene. Definitely I would tell those authors to sit with themselves a bit and think about, examine why they're doing this and the type of language they're using. So it really depends on where somebody's coming from. But I would say if a writer has sort of done it unthinkingly, which is, I think, a lot of times what happens, there's a scene of sexual violence. We're so steeped in it in media that sometimes it just seems like the natural thing to put there because I've seen it in all these, detective shows or whatever. To just sit with it and look at it and question it. Ask about, does it need to be there? Am I doing this well? Am I doing this intentionally? Is there a less cliched way of doing this that also, is going to make this a better book? And
Hmm.
make sure that any types of, sexual violence or violence against women are that you mean them to be there, that they're not there just because you kind of weren't thinking, and it's what we see in media all around us.
Yeah. So it's to really question their purpose. Yeah. Geek culture in general, including science fiction and fantasy, has had its share of critiques, saying that it's too male dominated, despite a rising number of prominent, well respected, and well known female, non binary, or genderqueer authors. So there's also still plenty of hostile, misogynist, and sexist behavior by male geeks towards female geeks, like we spoke about earlier. So, what do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's gaming or comics or books, more welcoming for women and girls?
I would really like to see, and I do see some of this, and thank you for this. I really want to see men calling out other men. I think that's what needs to happen. It can't be all on us. You know,
Yeah,
we're here, we're existing. You know, and some people are very activist and stuff, and that's great. But like, just being here and existing is also enough. And it can't always be on us to call out the sexism or the problematic things in genre.
exactly.
Yeah. So men calling out other men, and there are many who do, and a rising number who do, and I really I see it, and I really appreciate that.
What would you say to readers who loudly protest lists of recommended female, trans authors or non binary or genderqueer authors by saying stuff along the lines of, why should I care if the author is female or trans or genderqueer? I don't see a gender, or this is political correctness gone nuts. What would you say to that?
Honestly, I don't say anything because I'm just so tired of those arguments. I've sort of like noped out. I have had so many of those conversations, and where the other person wasn't listening, and I finally said, you know what, I'm just, come back to me when you want to have an actual discussion about it, right? But I think the serious answer to this is that something that I realized, because I was, I guess I would say I was raised colorblind and gender blind, and like I kind of I had a little bit of that attitude when I was younger, that like, oh, we're a post-racial, post-sexism world, everything's equal, because that was like sort of the aspirational things I saw in like the children's books that my parents would give me, whatever, right? That we all are equal, huzzah. Um, and I didn't realize for a very long time how like the institutional and systemic biases, and of course all of the like very overt bigotry that does happen as well. I also kind of wasn't aware of that for a long time, but especially the systemic and institutional biases, that really convinced me that I needed to be aware, that I needed to not be colorblind, that I needed to pay attention to the gender of the authors I was reading, because otherwise it would end up being like all white men, because that's what was always recommended to me, as I was saying earlier, tended to be recommended or just tended to be on the library shelves because
Yeah.
of all these systemic barriers, right? So once I started to seek out ways to diversify my reading and media consumption, there's so much out there that I wouldn't have seen otherwise because of all these institutional issues, right? So I would say that's an extremely compelling argument, and there are many scientific studies on institutional and systemic bias. If you're a science nerd, and sometimes these people who say these things, they're like, oh, I'm so logical, I just treat everybody the same, whatever. Well, look up some of these studies, right? If you want to be very logical about it, and realize that things are curated before they ever come to your eyes. It's not that you're not seeing gender, it's that somebody else is seeing gender for you and giving you a stack of predominantly male authors, and this goes through many layers before it gets to you. So by being aware of it, you are counterbalancing the biases that other people have put into this long chain before you see any media.
Mm. Okay. Moving on to our final cluster of questions. So you have been very supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women as a whole. Uh, these are pretty captain obvious questions. Why do you support the cause to end violence against women?
I mean, of course, the obvious reasons, right? But I do think, in particular, there are major societal issues still with domestic violence towards women, towards femme-presenting people, towards people socialized as women. Like,
Yeah.
this is there are like major specific problems in this area, and that's wrong. That's
Yeah.
wrong.
Simple, short answer. What do you think authors can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women and girls?
Ooh, uh, you know, it feels almost like presumptuous to say that like we can have some like big effect, but I try to have small effects, right? Like the types of characters I write, doing charity events like this, right? But you know, I feel like I try to put out more good in the world than harm. You know, I try to be thoughtful. You know, certainly I do activism of my own that's, you know, not, you know, necessarily related to like being a science fiction writer, and support charitable causes and stuff. But like, I think being thoughtful and listening, making sure we're not falling into stereotypes or having these portrayals of women that are destructive or are teaching. Oh, here's a big one, what you mentioned about consent, like teaching young men in particular about consent, you know, and normalizing consent and normalizing that this is you know, that asking and respecting boundaries. I think those are all great things, and that media can have a big impact in that.
Yeah. Well, okay, so that's all the questions that we have. I would really like to thank our fabulous author SL Huang and everybody for attending today. Just to go back to our goodies, SL has also generously donated a couple of awesome goodies to the stash of author goodies we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page, including SL Huang will write a limerick on a math or science topic of the donor's choice. So whether it's about pi or mRNA or black holes, name one and SL will get cracking on this writing challenge just for you, no matter how obscure the topic is. I hope I'm not putting too much pressure on SL here.
No guarantees on the quality of the limerick, but it will rhyme.
They will email a copy of the limerick to the donor with a hand-lettered version to follow. This treat is fully transferable or giftable, so you may request that they write the limerick as a birthday gift to a friend. The second goodie that we have up for grabs is if you are a novice science fiction and fantasy author looking for a professional critique of your query letter because you're hitting a wall of rejections from agents and publishers, well, SL is offering a chance for one Read for Pixels donor to have their query letter workshopped by them in writing via email. This includes 2 rounds of critiques, the initial submission and the revised submission, and a follow-up email of up to 3 questions after each round. These goodies are available to donors worldwide. However, if you want them, you'll need to make your donations fast because there is only one of each goodie and it's first come, first serve. So once these goodies are gone, they are gone. Okay, guys? So snag it, grab it. There are also plenty more author goodies available from authors and publishers including Sam Hawke, Derek Landy, Arkady Martin, Sarah Rees-Brennan, Jenny Lin, Julie Cerneda, Paul Tremblay, Sebastian de Castel, Dutton Books, Entangled Publishing, and more. New goodies will be released every week throughout this September. So far, we've raised $965 towards our $5,000 goal. So please give generously because our fundraiser will end in October 2021. All our funds go towards the Pixel Project work to help end violence against women. So just some information. Let me share some slides with everybody. So we have essentially, this is where you can donate for goodies via Riley Up on http://bit.ly. I believe our chat box moderators will also be putting the links on the chat box. And if you want to find out more about Read for Pixels, you can also go to http://bit.ly/readforpixels. I believe as well this will be put up on our YouTube chat box. And yeah, okay, so just going back again, the Pixel Project's first charity anthology, Giving the Devil His Due, Where Twilight Zone Meets Promising Young Woman, has also been released. So for anyone interested, I believe our chat box moderator will also be um, sharing this link. Oh dear. Okay, there's a tech issue. Sorry. Uh, okay, apologies, everybody. Let me just share the slide. But essentially, we have teamed up with 12 of the 16 authors to offer an exclusive limited edition anthology book plate for early bird buyers. Um, each author will sign 16 book plates and it'll be first come, first serve. Each book plate includes a resource for domestic violence and sexual assault victims and survivors in 205 countries. So I just need to share this, but my computer has decided to die on me right now. Okay. There we go. So it is now available on Amazon, Kobo, Google Play, Book Depository, and other major booksellers worldwide. For more information about the anthology, you may visit the link http://bit.ly/giving the devil his due. Okay, so yep, and to find out more about violence against women, you can, and what you can do about it, you can visit the Pixel Project's website at www.thepixelproject.net. All net proceeds from the anthology, as well, just to let our audience know, will go towards keeping the Pixel Project's campaigns, programs, and initiatives such as this one alive and kicking. So yeah, SL, do you have any announcements to make?
I don't think so. We talked about my books. The Water Outlaws is coming, sometime next year and change. Yeah, you can find me on the interwebs otherwise.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, SL. Have a good night or a good day wherever you are in the world.
Thank you, everyone.